We're going to take a bit of a departure from my usual line of topics to talk about something a little bit more philosophical. As you have surmised from the title, I think it's important, if you are looking to build an RPG, to build an RPG. There's value in creativity. And that kind of is the through line of everything I'm about to say, is that being creative is worth itself, and you don't need to justify it in any other way. So if you have a passion for game mechanics, for incentive systems, for character archetypes and concepts, maybe a little bit of like fiction and lore to throw in there as well, I think it's a fantastic idea for you to just dive in and start making RPGs. I've been building RPGs for 10 years now, maybe a little bit longer. Ironically, right around the time 5th edition started, though I actually, like, in full fairness, I don't think it was me, like, running away, or at least I didn't interpret it that way at the time. I thought I saw myself as, like, moving away from D&D as a franchise, but I think maybe it had to do with 5th edition. I don't know. Anyways, for about a decade now, I've been building RPGs. And hey, check it out. Most of them are not successful. Like, and by successful, I mean, I haven't pressed forward. I haven't published them. I haven't developed them to what I would consider completion. A lot of them I consider to have some pretty fundamental flaws that prevent them from being developed further. But every time, I learn. And I enjoy the creative experience. And so these are not wasted efforts. This is not like, 10 years of my life wasted on games that didn't work. No, absolutely not. Given the chance to do it again, I'd do it again. Given the benefit of hindsight, I would do it differently. There's a lot of lessons that I learned that maybe could have been learned other ways, taking better advice from the internet in certain specific areas, not all advice, but also mainly broadening my horizons first. Because when I first started building RPGs, I had played basically D&D and then a couple of functionally one-shots of other systems. And so I didn't really have a breadth of experience. And so I've been spending 10 years developing that experience, this sort of broader outlook on the way that RPGs can work, and learning lessons from systems that do things that I couldn't have imagined 10 years ago. When I first played Blades in the Dark, it was such an eye-opening moment. When I first played Legend of the Five Rings, it was incredibly immersive in ways that D&D never could be. Like when 5th edition first came out and I saw, the personality traits, bonds, flaws, and ideals. That system, I thought, oh, that's really cool. D&D is starting to become like, excuse me, like role-playing oriented. Because those are role-playing elements, and you get mechanically rewarded for playing them out. Yeah, D&D is moving away from being just combat-oriented, and now we're going into role-play elements. When, in fact, that is incredibly shallow when it is used, and most DMs I know don't even use them. They are completely missed or ignored entirely by nearly every DM I've ever seen run a game. And I know that the couple of times that I've run, because I've never run a 5th edition campaign, but I have run a few one-shots. Doing a campaign, by the way, I won't do it. I'm never going to do it, never have done it, won't do it. Tried to do it and gave up immediately because the math for designing an adventure day is so complicated that it's not worth my time. I got spoiled on, this is so ranty, this is so tangenty. Long story short, I've never run a campaign, but I've run a few one-shots. And I would also forget about personality traits, bonds, flaws, and ideals. Like, it's just not something that I can keep track of while running a game. So, when I played Legend of the Five Rings, an actual role-play oriented game. It was such a different experience, and it really opened my eyes to the kinds of mechanics that actually work. I looked into Fate. Never played it, never ran it, never got it. But I looked into it, and I liked what I saw there. Yeah, just like there's been a dozen different RPGs. The Modiphius 2D20 system, I love. So me personally, as a preference for myself, I like meta currency systems in RPGs. I love them. Hero points, Fabula points, Fate points, story points, whatever points you have that you can spend, it's all good. If you have that in your system, I'm probably going to be like, I like that. I like that part. I want to interact with that part. But that's just me. That's not everybody. And so, as I increase my horizons and increase my breadth of experience, I can take that experience and work it into my own systems. And that's why I'm now really confident about Legends and Lore. And I was jumping into it. Like, from the very beginning, I thought, I know how to make an RPG now. And I didn't before. Like, importantly, my previous attempts were all flawed in some pretty specific ways. I have moved past that. Now I can develop my RPG. And thus far, I've been right. Legends and Lore is coming along. I'm working on the first public draft for a second phase of the playtest. We have concluded our initial playtest campaign. We're going to be actually starting another one momentarily. And that's coming along really well. And I couldn't have done that without all of that last 10 years of building an RPG. Even, like, no matter how many RPGs I play, and no matter how broad my experience is, like, I have to have the experience of building the RPG to figure out what works, what doesn't, why people have been doing things the way they do, and why they haven't been doing things this other way. Because I had a lot of, like, pretty crazy ideas. Loads of ideas. I have no shortage of ideas. But I had to see what works and what doesn't, and more importantly, why. And that kind of works into figuring out incentive systems and understanding how incentives work in games, particularly RPGs. Because it is a little bit different when you have, like, a board game and you have this pretty limited space in which players can interact with the mechanics. In an RPG, things have to be a lot more open. It's very different. It's a very different kind of design. But even if you have no experience, because here's the thing, you can't get experience without going and getting experience. At no point are you going to wake up one day and say, I have experience now. Now I can make an RPG. If you want to make an RPG, you got to start, man. Just be aware that failure isn't really a thing for this particular type of activity. Because creativity is worth itself. It justifies itself. You can't fail at making an RPG. Not really. Not in the same way that you can fail at building a table, because you can get to a point where, like, oh, well, this table's messed up. It's never going to work as a table. I've wasted these materials. I have failed at the task. Not so with building an RPG, because you always come away with something. You may not come away with a functional game. In fact, if it's your first, I would bet money you're not going to come away with a functional game. But you are going to come away with more experience. You're going to come away with some important lessons, new knowledge, and maybe a deeper understanding and appreciation for the games that you have played and will play. And it's going to change the context of everything that you do vis-a-vis game design and role-playing games from now on. So, whenever people are talking about how they're building games or they're looking to build an RPG, I'm always like, yeah, man, do it. Do it. Now, if they've only played D&D, I think it will save you some time and some heartache to go broaden your horizons first. Go play some other games. Like, pick 3 games that have nothing to do with D&D and nothing to do with each other. Find 3 games and play at least a couple of sessions of each of them. that can be a tall order for some people. Like, you got to find someone to run the game. You got to set aside time. These may be like basically everything you do for a day. So like that's nearly a week spread out of just doing these things for functionally research purposes, But that's what I recommend. 3 games that have nothing to do with D&D and nothing to do with each other. They are not derivatives of each other, and they are not based on D&D in any way. And what you'll find is that lots of games do things very differently than Dungeons & Dragons, and oftentimes it works better. It does. Particularly when it comes to non-combat things, but even sometimes combat things, I prefer Blades in the Dark and the Forged in the Dark family. I prefer that way of doing combat over 5th edition's combat system. There are better combat systems out there for sure. 4th edition, off the top of my head, but also things like Lancer. If you want a nice, cool combat system, there are games for that. But I tend to lean towards the narrative style combat, where there's less structure and there's more narrative freedom to do cool and creative things constantly. You're never going to learn that from playing D&D, because D&D is very structured. It's very solid, very rigid. So if you only have played D&D, I recommend going and getting more experience and then launching in to making your RPG. Because if you don't, what you're going to end up doing is, it's like, and I'm almost positive I've used this analogy before. It's like if somebody only ever watched Marvel movies. They've never seen any other media of any kind. They've only seen Marvel movies. And they've seen all the Marvel movies. And they're like, that's really cool. I want to make a movie. What are they going to do? A, they're going to have no idea where to start. It's going to take a long time for them just to learn how to make the movie, because making movies is complicated. But then they're also only going to try to do things that they've seen in Marvel movies. And they have no idea about other genres, And not to say the Marvel movies are bad. I like lots of Marvel movies. Some Marvel movies are some of my favorite movies out there. There are some really good Marvel movies. There's also some stinkers out there. But regardless of what you think about the Marvel franchise, there's way more to experience. There's way more to learn about and know. And then they go, yeah, I don't really want to watch any other movies. How do you know? How do you know what else you want to watch? That's what it was. I used this analogy when it was about going out and playing other games rather than developing other games. But, this person who's only seen Marvel movies now wants to go make a movie of their own. And they're like, okay, I'm going to make a mystery movie. Well, how are you going to do that? You don't know how mysteries are written or built or developed. You have no experience with this whatsoever. Go watch some mystery movies. There's some excellent ones out there. So go broaden your horizons, play other games, but also look to just dive into the project. What is the worst that could happen? The game breaks, people like you say, like you make your first draft. You're like, here, look at this. Here's a thing that I made, and check it out. The internet tends to be pretty brutal, tends to be pretty direct. They're not going to spare you, and they're going to say, well, this doesn't work, and this doesn't work, and this doesn't work, and this doesn't work. These are completely broken. This is clearly derivative of this, and it doesn't work for these reasons. This is a mess. And at that point, you have 2 choices. You can say, well, flip the table. I'm out. I'm just not doing this. Clearly, I'm not cut out for this because I didn't do it right on my first try. Or you can say, okay. And either change it, like try to refine it if you think that it can be salvaged, or say, okay, now I've learned from this experience, this isn't going to work. Maybe I'll go do something else. And you start another RPG. I've done 8 or 10 RPGs in the last decade. And only this last one that I'm working on has actually worked, because I had a much clearer vision going in to this design than I did with the others. The others were kind of based on mechanics. This one is based on a higher concept that I am building mechanics for, and I now have the broad experience to be able to do so. So even like there's really no such thing as failure in the traditional sense for building RPGs. And so there's no real reason not to do it if you want to do it. Just be prepared for what's about to happen, because you're not going to get it right on your first try. There's going to be problems. In particular, like, even if you have lots of experience with building RPGs, you start a new one, there's going to be problems there. It may need to be scrapped. But especially if it's like your first couple of games, like, almost certainly not going to work out. No one is good at making games from the get-go. It just doesn't happen. But you're going to find satisfaction in the creativity. You're going to find that the joy of creating rule systems and having people interact with them is unlike nearly any other creative experience I've ever had. I've written stories. I've made, I think calling them short films is probably over-aggrandizing them. You know, I've done media. I've done stories. I've been creative for pretty much my entire life. I've made several games for myself and my friends. Nothing published. But RPGs are probably the most satisfying creative experience I've ever involved myself in. And so if you are interested in playing RPGs, you have my support. I would also encourage you, by the way, random viewer on the internet, if you are interested in creating RPGs, please join my Discord server. We love talking about game design. That's what my Discord server is mainly about. Like, we talk about D&D a lot because, you know, it's D&D. It's the thing to talk about, right? But we like to talk about game design and principles and mechanics and incentives and, like, the creative process of building RPGs is mainly what I made my Discord server for. So get in there. I would love to talk to you about it. I'm hugely thrilled with the whole idea of game design. So if you're making an RPG, I want to talk about it with you. So join me down there. The link is, of course, in the description, as it is on all my videos. So, yeah. If you're interested in making RPGs, just do it. Just do it. It's going to justify itself. You're always going to come away more enriched than you are now.